Dramily.com, unlimited drama series.
Family dinners at my sister Lydia's house were like watching a reality show where everyone pretended to be happy while secretly plotting each other's downfall. Tonight felt different, though, the air thick with something more toxic than her usual passive-aggressive comments about my modest career in tech consulting. I'm Julian Brooks, 41 years old, and I've learned that the most dangerous moments in life often come disguised as ordinary Tuesday evenings. Like this one, sitting around Lydia's mahogany dining table that cost more than my car, watching my wife Natalie fidget with her wedding ring while my brother-in-law Trevor poured wine like he was conducting an orchestra. "Julian, you really should try this Cabernet," Trevor said, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for people who think their wealth makes them wine experts. "It's from a private vineyard in Napa. Costs more than most people make in a week." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Trevor. I'm sure it tastes like money." Lydia laughed too loudly at that, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. She'd always been the successful one in our family, the one who married well, lived in the right neighborhood, drove the right car. Tonight, she seemed especially eager to showcase her perfect life, which should have been my first warning sign. My parents, Harold and Margaret Brooks, sat at opposite ends of the table like bookends, holding together a story nobody really wanted to read. Dad carved the roast with surgical precision, while Mom peppered everyone with questions designed to extract maximum gossip value. "Natalie, dear, you look tired," Mom said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Are you getting enough sleep?" Natalie's cheeks flushed pink. "I'm fine, Margaret. Just busy at work." She worked as a school counselor, supposedly helping troubled teenagers navigate their problems. The irony wasn't lost on me. My 16-year-old niece Chloe sat quietly, picking at her food and shooting me sympathetic glances. She'd always been sharp, too smart for her own good, and I caught her watching the adults with the kind of calculating intelligence that made me wonder what she'd already figured out. The conversation flowed around topics I'd heard 1,000 times before: Trevor's latest business deals, Lydia's charity work, my parents' opinions on everything from politics to the weather. But underneath it all, I sensed undercurrents I couldn't quite identify. That's when I dropped my fork. It wasn't intentional. My hand simply slipped, sending the silver utensil clattering to the hardwood floor. As I bent to retrieve it, the angle gave me a perfect view under the table. Trevor's leg was pressed firmly between Natalie's knees, his expensive Italian leather shoe rubbing against her calf. Her wedding ring caught the light from the chandelier above, creating a tiny spotlight on what had to be the most devastating moment of my life. I straightened slowly, the fork forgotten on the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The dinner conversation continued around me, but everything sounded muffled, like I was underwater. Natalie's face had gone pale, and Trevor was staring at me with the expression of a man who'd just been caught stealing from the collection plate. "Everything okay, Julian?" Lydia asked, but her voice carried a nervous edge that told me she knew exactly what I'd seen. I stood up completely, my chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The entire table went silent, everyone frozen, like actors who'd forgotten their lines. Trevor cleared his throat and set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "Julian, maybe we should step outside for a few words." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I looked around the table, at my parents' confused faces, at Lydia's guilty expression, at Chloe's wide eyes, and finally at Natalie, who couldn't meet my gaze. "Sure," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Let's talk. But here's the thing nobody knew. I'd been preparing for this moment for 2 months. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but I'd noticed things. Natalie's late nights at school events, her new perfume, the way she'd started working out and buying clothes that were just a little too nice for a counselor's salary. So I'd moved our valuable items to a storage unit across town, changed the passwords on our joint accounts, even installed a new doorbell camera that recorded everything in high definition. Because if there's one thing my years in tech support taught me, it's that people are predictable and betrayal always leaves a digital trail. As Trevor and I walked toward the front door, I felt oddly calm. The hardest part was over. The not knowing, the suspicion, the constant second guessing of my own instincts. Now I had confirmation, and confirmation meant I could act. The rain had started while we were eating, turning the driveway into a mirror that reflected the streetlights like fallen stars. Trevor pulled out a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly as he lit it. How long? I asked. He took a deep drag, exhaling smoke into the humid air. Does it matter? Humor me. 18 months. He said it like he was discussing the weather, casual and matter of fact. Look, Julian, these things happen. Natalie and I, we connected. You can't fake chemistry. I almost laughed. Chemistry. Like they were characters in some romantic movie instead of two people who'd been lying to my face for a year and a half. Here's what's going to happen, Trevor continued, dropping his cigarette and crushing it under his heel. You're going to keep your mouth shut about this. Tell anyone, and I'll make sure everyone knows how unstable you've become. The paranoia, the accusations, the way you've been acting lately. People will believe it, Julian. I'm very convincing. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed him the video. It was time-stamped from last Tuesday at 2:17 p.m., crystal clear footage of Trevor entering our apartment building, using what had to be Natalie's key. He stayed for exactly 93 minutes. I'd checked. His face went through several interesting color changes as he watched himself commit adultery in high definition. I've got 12 more videos just like that one, I said, pocketing the phone. Plus, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and my personal favorite, text messages between you and my sister discussing the best time to break the news to me. Apparently, you were waiting until after my promotion came through. Thoughtful. Trevor's confident demeanor cracked like ice on a warming pond. You can't prove? I can prove everything, I interrupted. But here's what really interests me, Trevor. That $12,000 deposit you and Lydia put down for your vow renewal ceremony next month? The one at the Fairmont? My name's on that contract too, remember? Something about your credit being tied up in investments. I watched the realization dawn on his face like a particularly ugly sunrise. You wouldn't. Watch me. I walked back into the house, leaving him standing in the rain like a scarecrow in an expensive suit. The dinner table was exactly as I'd left it. Everyone frozen, waiting for the explosion that never came. Instead, I sat down, picked up my fork from the floor, and calmly finished my roast beef. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and Trevor's footsteps as he came back inside, water dripping from his hair onto Lydia's Persian rug. Chloe was the first to speak. Uncle Julian, are you okay? Never better, sweetheart. I smiled at her, and she smiled back, understanding passing between us like a secret handshake. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of forced conversation and meaningful glances. Natalie tried to catch my eye several times, but I focused on my food, on the weather, on anything except the woman I'd been married to for 8 years, who'd been screwing my brother-in-law for the last 18 months. When we finally left, Natalie was quiet during the drive home, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl waiting to be punished. I turned on the radio and listened to classic rock, humming along to songs about betrayal and revenge, while she sat there radiating guilt like heat from a fever. I woke up the next morning with the kind of clarity that only comes after your entire world has shifted on its axis. Natalie was already gone. Early meeting, she'd said. Though I noticed she'd taken extra care with her makeup and chosen the blue dress Trevor had complimented at last month's barbecue. My first call was to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. I need to cancel a reservation, I told the events coordinator, a woman named Patricia, who sounded like she'd been dealing with wedding drama since the dawn of time. Certainly, sir. What's the name on the booking? Brooks and Hines. The vow renewal ceremony scheduled for next month. There was a pause, the sound of fingers clicking on a keyboard. I see the reservation. However, I should inform you that canceling at this point means forfeiting the entire deposit. I understand. Cancel it. Sir, that's $12,000. I'm aware of the amount. Cancel it. Another pause. Very well. The cancellation will be processed today. Is there anything else I can help you with? Actually, yes. Could you send the cancellation confirmation to all 3 email addresses on file? Of course. I hung up and made coffee, waiting for the fireworks to begin. They started at 10:47 a.m. when my phone rang with Lydia's number. Julian, what the hell did you do? Her voice was shrill enough to shatter windows. Good morning to you too, sister. Don't play games with me. The hotel just called. They canceled our venue. Interesting. Why would they do that? Because someone with authorization told them to. Someone whose name was on the contract. I took a sip of coffee, savoring both the flavor and the moment. That's unfortunate. Maybe you should have thought about that before you helped your husband cheat on me with my wife. The silence that followed was so complete, I wondered if she'd hung up. Then I heard her breathing, sharp and angry. We need to talk. No, we really don't. Julian, please, let me explain. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I did the same with Trevor's. Natalie's phone I left active. I wanted to see what she'd say when she finally worked up the courage to call. My next move was more surgical. I opened my laptop and began crafting an email, choosing each word with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. The recipient list included my parents, my aunt and uncle, my cousins, and about 15 family friends who'd been part of our social circle for years. The subject line read, Setting the Record Straight. The message was brief, factual, and devastating. Dear family and friends, I wanted to inform you directly about some recent developments in my marriage. After discovering an 18-month affair between my wife Natalie and my brother-in-law Trevor, I've decided to file for divorce. I've attached some documentation for those who might question the circumstances. I asked for privacy during this difficult time, but felt you deserved to know the truth rather than hearing rumors or half-stories. Best regards, Julian. The attachments included selected photos from my doorbell camera, screenshots of text messages between Trevor and Lydia discussing their deception, and hotel receipts showing charges to Trevor's credit card on days when he'd told Lydia he was working late. I hovered over the send button for exactly 30 seconds, then clicked it. The responses started coming within minutes. My cousin Sarah was first. Julian, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If you need anything, please call. Then, my Uncle Robert. That son of a bitch. I never trusted him. My Aunt Linda. We're here for you, honey. Come for dinner Sunday. But the most satisfying response came from my mother, who'd apparently called Lydia immediately after reading the email. I know this because Lydia tried calling me from Mom's phone, and when I didn't answer, Mom texted me, Your sister is here crying. She says it's not what it looks like. I told her it looks like she helped her husband cheat on my son. She didn't have much to say after that. By noon, I'd received 17 messages of support, and exactly 0 defending Trevor or Lydia. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and it wasn't pretty for the defendants. Natalie finally called at 2:30 p.m., just as I was finishing lunch. Julian, we need to talk. Do we? Please don't do this. Don't destroy everything over a mistake. A mistake? I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. 18 months of mistakes? That's not a mistake, Natalie. That's a lifestyle choice. I love you, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. I made a terrible error in judgment, but I love you. We can work through this. No, I said simply. We can't. Julian, please. I've filed for divorce. You'll be served tomorrow. I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I drove to my storage unit and retrieved the suitcases I'd packed 2 months ago, back when I was still hoping I was wrong about everything. The apartment felt different when I returned, smaller somehow, like it was already shrinking away from me. I packed methodically, taking only what was mine, leaving behind the life we'd built together like a snake shedding its skin. My phone had 43 missed calls when I turned it back on. Natalie, Trevor, Lydia, even a few family friends who wanted the full story. I deleted them all without listening and drove to the extended stay hotel I'd booked that morning. The room was clean, anonymous, and perfectly suited to my current needs. I ordered Chinese takeout and spent the evening researching divorce attorneys, reading reviews and checking credentials like I was buying a car. Around 10 p.m., there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Chloe standing in the hallway, looking nervous but determined. "How did you find me?" I asked, opening the door. "I followed Mom when she drove over here to yell at you. She's sitting in the parking lot, working up the courage to come upstairs." I stepped aside to let her in. "Smart kid. Uncle Julian, I'm sorry about what happened." "Not your fault, sweetheart." She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "I knew, about Dad and Aunt Natalie. I saw them together at the mall last month, and they weren't shopping for Mom's birthday present." The admission hit me like a physical blow. This kid, this 16-year-old kid, had been carrying that knowledge around, probably wondering if she should tell someone, probably feeling guilty for not speaking up. "Why didn't you say anything?" She shrugged. "Who would I tell, Mom? She already knew. Grandma and Grandpa? They would have just caused drama. You?" I thought about it, but I figured you'd find out eventually. "You were right. Are you going to be okay?" The question was so earnest, so full of genuine concern, that I felt something crack inside my chest. "Yeah, I'm going to be fine. Better."
He texted at 2 a.m. Leave the door unlocked. You left our door unlocked for him?
Once it was
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
Than fine, actually. "Good." She stood up and hugged me, quick and fierce. "I love you, Uncle Julian. You're the only adult in this family who ever treated me like I had a brain." After she left, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about betrayal and family, and the strange ways people justify their actions to themselves. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers and paperwork, and the messy business of untangling 8 years of shared life. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: peace. The divorce papers were served on a Thursday morning while Natalie was having coffee with her friend Rebecca at their usual spot downtown. I know this because Rebecca called me afterward, her voice tight with disapproval. "Julian, what you're doing is cruel," she said. "Serving her in public like that? Everyone saw." "Good," I replied. "Everyone should see. She's devastated. She should be." Rebecca had been one of our couple friends, the kind who invited us to dinner parties and game nights, and acted like we were all living in some perfect suburban sitcom. Now she was choosing sides, and apparently she'd chosen poorly. "You're being vindictive." "I'm being honest. There's a difference. She made a mistake. She made a choice. Every day for 18 months, she made the same choice. That's not a mistake, Rebecca. That's a pattern." I hung up and added her number to my growing blocked list. Within a week, I'd lost 3 couple friends, 2 individual friends who thought I was overreacting, and 1 neighbor who felt I should have handled things privately. But I'd gained something more valuable: clarity about who my real friends were. My buddy Marcus from college called me that Friday evening. "Hey man, I heard about what happened. You need anything?" "I'm good, thanks." "No, seriously. You need someone to help you move? Someone to drink beer and talk shit about your ex? I'm available." That's friendship. Not the fair weather kind that evaporates the moment things get messy, but the real deal that shows up when you need it most. Meanwhile, Trevor's world was crumbling with the efficiency of a controlled demolition. His boss at the wealth management firm, a no-nonsense woman named Catherine Mills, had received an anonymous email containing some very interesting information about her employees' extracurricular activities. I know this because Trevor's secretary, Jennifer, was married to my friend Dave from the gym. Small world, especially when you're trying to destroy someone's reputation. Catherine called Trevor into her office yesterday, Dave told me over beers. Something about conduct unbecoming and moral character clauses in his employment contract. Jennifer said he came out looking like he'd seen a ghost. Interesting. The firm handles a lot of family money, Rich people with traditional values, they don't like scandals. 2 days later, Trevor was placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his conduct. The review, I was told, would take approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks without pay, 6 weeks of uncertainty, 6 weeks of watching his carefully constructed life fall apart piece by piece. Lydia lasted exactly 9 days after the venue cancellation before filing for divorce. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the real reason. You can't reconcile with someone who's been screwing your brother-in-law. She tried calling me one more time, using Chloe's phone. Julian, please. We need to talk about Chloe. She needs stability right now. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you helped destroy her family. I'm her mother, and I'm her uncle who actually gives a damn about her well-being. Funny how that works. What do you want from me? What do you want me to say? I don't want anything from you, Lydia. That's the point. I want you to leave me alone and live with the consequences of your choices. You're destroying our family. No, I said. You already did that. I'm just making sure everyone knows who's responsible. The social fallout was swift and brutal. Lydia's book club dropped her. Her charity organization asked her to step down from the board. Even her yoga instructor, a woman named Crystal who usually radiated positive energy like a human solar panel, started giving her the cold shoulder. It turns out that suburban social circles have very little tolerance for adultery enablers. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source: my parents. Dad called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had made him successful in business for 40 years. Your mother and I have been talking, he said. We want you to know we support you completely. Thanks, Dad. We also want you to know that Trevor is no longer welcome in our home. Neither is Lydia, for that matter, until she makes some serious changes. I felt something loosen in my chest. What about Chloe? Chloe is always welcome. She's our granddaughter, and none of this is her fault. She's been through enough. Agreed. Which is why your mother's picking her up for dinner tomorrow night. And every week after that until things settle down. That's when I knew I'd won. Not just the battle, but the war. When your own parents disown you in favor of the person you betrayed, you've reached a level of social destruction that's almost artistic in its completeness. Natalie tried one last desperate gambit the following weekend. She showed up at my hotel room with flowers, tears, and what she probably thought was a heartfelt speech about second chances and forgiveness. I know I hurt you, she said, standing in my doorway like a door-to-door salesperson peddling redemption. I know I broke your trust, but people make mistakes, Julian. Good people make terrible mistakes, and they deserve the chance to make things right. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since that dinner at Lydia's house. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 9 years ago. But something fundamental had changed, and it wasn't just my perception of her. You're right, I said. Good people do make terrible mistakes. But good people also face the consequences of those mistakes. They don't spend 18 months lying about them. I was scared. Of what? Of losing you. So instead, you made sure you'd lose me by betraying me in the worst possible way? She didn't have an answer for that. People rarely do when you point out the logical flaws in their self-serving narratives. I love you, she said, playing her final card. No, I replied. You love the idea of not being the villain in this story. You love the comfort and security I provided. You might even love the version of me that existed before I found out who you really are. But you don't love me, Natalie. If you did, none of this would have happened. I closed the door and listened to her cry in the hallway for exactly 7 minutes before she gave up and left. The next morning, I got a call from my lawyer with good news. Natalie had agreed to an uncontested divorce with a very favorable settlement for me. Apparently, her attorney had explained that adultery cases rarely go well for the cheating spouse, especially when there's documented evidence and witnesses. I hung up the phone and realized I was smiling for the first time in months. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment across town, reading the newspaper and drinking coffee that actually tasted good because I'd bought a decent machine with some of the money from our asset division. The apartment was smaller than the place I'd shared with Natalie, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book, every coffee mug belonged to me and me alone. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing there with a grin and 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might want some company, he said when I opened the door. Always. We sat on my couch, a new leather sectional that Natalie would have hated, and he filled me in on the latest gossip from our old social circle. Rebecca and her husband are getting divorced, he said. Apparently, all the drama with you and Natalie made her take a hard look at her own marriage. Turns out, her husband's been having his own extracurricular activities. Karma's funny that way. Trevor got fired last week, officially for violation of company standards. But everyone knows the real reason. What's he doing now? Selling insurance. Jennifer heard he's living in a studio apartment in Tacoma and driving a 10-year-old Honda. I tried to feel sorry for him and found I couldn't quite manage it. And Lydia? Still living with your parents, last I heard. Chloe's doing well, though. She got accepted to that early admission program at the university. She's a smart kid. Takes after her uncle. We drank our coffee in comfortable silence for a while, watching the rain streak down the windows. It was the kind of peaceful moment I'd forgotten was possible during those last months of my marriage, when every conversation was a minefield and every silence felt loaded with unspoken accusations. You know what the funny thing is? I said eventually. What's that? I'm happier now than I've been in years. Not just because the divorce is over, but because I finally know who I really am when everything else gets stripped away. And who's that? Someone who doesn't accept betrayal. Someone who fights back when people try to walk all over him. Someone who values honesty more than keeping the peace. Marcus raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. Here's to knowing who you are. I'll drink to that. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. Julian, it's Chloe. Hey, sweetheart, how are you doing? Good. Really good, actually. I wanted to thank you. For what? For showing me what it looks like when someone refuses to be treated badly. I know this whole thing has been awful, but watching you handle it, it taught me something important. What's that? That you don't have to accept other people's bad behavior just to keep them happy. That sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing to do. I felt a lump form in my throat. You're going to be just fine, Chloe. I know, and so are you. After she hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the strange ways life can surprise you. 6 months ago, I thought I was living a pretty good life with a woman I loved and a family that cared about me. It turned out I was living a lie with a woman who was using me and a family that was perfectly willing to sacrifice my happiness for their own convenience. But losing all of that had given me something better. The knowledge that I could survive anything, that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, and that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having your illusions shattered so completely that you have no choice but to build something real in their place. The rain stopped while I was thinking, and sunlight streamed through my windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations. I made myself another cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and started writing. Not a story about revenge or betrayal or the ways people disappoint each other. Instead, I wrote about second chances and new beginnings and the surprising resilience of the human heart. I wrote about a man who lost everything he thought he wanted and found everything he actually needed. I wrote about hope. 6 months later, the story was published in a literary magazine. It wasn't a bestseller or anything dramatic like that, but it was mine. My words, my experience, my truth, transformed into something that might help someone else going through their own dark night of the soul. Trevor called me after it came out. I don't know how he got my new number, but his voice on the voicemail was different. Smaller somehow, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. Julian, it's Trevor. I read your story. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. I deleted the message without calling him back. Some apologies come too late to matter, and some bridges burn so completely that there's no point in trying to rebuild them. But I kept writing. Stories about flawed people making difficult choices, about the consequences of our actions, about the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. Each story was a small act of transformation, turning pain into art, betrayal into wisdom, loss into something resembling grace. One evening, as I was finishing a particularly difficult piece about forgiveness, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number. Julian, I have some news. Good news or bad news? That depends on your perspective. Natalie got married last weekend. I waited for the punch of emotion, the stab of jealousy or regret or loss. Instead, I felt nothing but mild curiosity. To whom? Some man she met at work, a principal from another school district. Good for her. Are you okay? I'm perfect, Mom. Actually perfect. And I was. Not because my ex-wife had moved on, but because I had. Not just moved on, but moved up, moved forward, moved into a version of myself that was stronger and wiser and infinitely more authentic than the man who'd sat at that dinner table 8 months ago and discovered his world was built on lies. That night, I finished the story about forgiveness and saved it to my hard drive. Then I poured myself a glass of wine. Not expensive wine, just wine that tasted good, and stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Natalie was starting her second marriage, probably promising to love and honor and cherish her new husband the way she'd once promised to love and honor and cherish me. Maybe this time she'd mean it. Maybe she'd learned something from the wreckage of our relationship. Somewhere else, Trevor was probably lying awake in his studio apartment, wondering how his life had gone so wrong so quickly. Maybe he was learning something too, about consequences and character and the true cost of betrayal. And somewhere in between, Lydia was trying to rebuild her relationship with her daughter and figure out how to move forward after losing everything she'd thought defined her. But I wasn't thinking about any of them anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow and the story I wanted to write next and the life I was building one careful choice at a time. The life that was entirely, authentically, unapologetically mine.